Greetings. This is a special edition of Content Evolution New World. I'm Kevin Clark on the East Coast. Mike McGuire's on the West Coast. Mike, today we're talking about IBM in the news, my former stomping ground, and looks like they've laid off 1,000 people and essentially closed research and development operations in China. So IBM is now not going to be a R&D or player right in that country. Interesting. What I've read is that there are some other places where people can apply for jobs, but there were limited number of opportunities in Japan, US, and Singapore is the way that I understood it. So there are certainly more labs than that, but that's just where the ops were. I'm, just interested in what you think, and let's toss it back and forth because, it's being characterized as, another U.S. company departure from China. There was some notion of a 20% decrease in revenue. However, we haven't always made a linkage between R&D operations and revenue. So, over to you. How does this read, from your point of view?
Well, I guess, in hindsight, I could say, wow, I remember 15, 20 years ago when the biggest concern that Western companies had when they would go into China to create, business units was intellectual property. Right. Oh, and then the requirements, if you recall back in the day, that if you were operating, there was some requirements about you might have to share some of that R&D with the government, right? Or a company tied to the government. Now it's, you could, the revenue thing I thought was interesting considering it wasn't fully an R&D facility, right? Which is, to your point, the massive budgets at IBM, I think, what was it? The typically it's 2 to 5%, right? Of revenue gets thrown back into R&D, a lot higher at some places, a little lower at others.
Well, it's one of the
to your
very
point, where
it's one of the very last standing R&D labs that's commercial on the planet, because most companies have foregone the R part. They don't do research. They partner with universities, or they do research in other ways, but it's usually just development, right, on the way to being translated into let's go to market. So
well, right. And I think that movement away from more public or very specific public kind of entity called the research and design, where there, as you rightly note, the pure research part doesn't seem to be incented anymore at a lot of companies. I don't, does Apple do a lot of R&D? Sure they do, but it's all for them, right? There's no, I think there's very little work with universities at a lot of companies, right? It's all kind of their own private kind of kingdom, if you will. I think what's interesting, right, is kind of to some degree, not that I'm a geopolitical expert, but the point you made earlier, which is where are some of these, R&D staff, where are their next, ports of call, right? And is it Japan? Is it South Korea, Europe? I don't think anybody wants to get too far from the Asian market for a lot of these entities. But now it's, it's almost like you look at the headlines, it's like, well, it's all about concerns of geopolitical concerns, the Chinese government, kind of asserting itself. All, reasonably true. But I think given in particular that location in China and that small island off the coast of China and Korea is, an area I was wondering if that wouldn't be a place where they would put some of their R&D, but that would seem to be very restrictive in terms of if you are going to do pure research. Taiwan's a very, important entity, obviously, with TSMC, but is there enough there for IBM to put a full-blown facility? And would they want to,
Well, I
move
mean,
from a hostile facility to an island in the middle of the
well,
Pacific
I
Ocean?
think that, they're not suspending sales or support operations. And so the fact is that if you're an IBM customer, this does not directly affect, the ability of IBM to sell you what was, in the portfolio that was authorized to be sold in China.
Mhm.
Um, and they have sales operations and offices in Taiwan too. All right. I mean, there are very few places on the planet where IBM does not have, the ability to sell something to someone. All right. So I'll just say that seems to be a non sequitur to me. When you look at what research is focused on today, it used to be much broader, right, in terms of basic sciences. I think that it has basic scientists that feed into artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and next generation, semiconductor
Right.
technologies that go beyond what's currently being made on fabs for supercomputers. So the more exotic material kinds of things, that
Right.
have been discussed for a while, gallium arsenide, right? And, those kinds of things are, still looking at that as you start to push the uh, what you can do with standard silicon, you start to think about, okay, I'm going to need to do something else.
Right.
Right? And so it doesn't surprise me that IBM sold off all of its semiconductor, capability, several years ago, because it had its eye on, all right, that's really not the tech that we want to use in the future. It's going to be something else. And so I'm fine with that. I'm going to make a speculation.
Okay.
My speculation is the early reporting, by the way, that wasn't picked up in the later reporting. It was in the first, report outs. Was the first indication that employees had that, what was going to happen on Monday afternoon when they got told, all right, that this was happening, is they lost access to their email and files to IBM on Sunday. All right. They they kind of, what's
Uh,
going on? So they turned off access. All right. And then they had an official announcement. All right. So a couple of things that one is they weren't they weren't going to foreshadow, because they didn't want anybody doing a data dump, okay, of
correct.
things that are, available. Oh, we're about to lose access. All right, I'm getting laid off. All right, so that normally doesn't happen um, under the circumstances that I'm aware of, when you're, closing a division or laying off employees. They continue to have access, right? They may be asked to, gather their things and depart a physical facility, right, within a certain period of time. Um, but that was, and I just might not be up on all the procedures, all right? So I'll just, play it. So that's something that triggered a second thought in my mind, which is IBM may be on the cusp of some kind of breakthrough that it does not want to share with China. Okay,
I think that's
that
a very
it's this
reasonable.
close in some other laboratory or some other part of the company, and it said, you know what, um, this has been good up to this point, but it's not going to be good past this point, and we need to go ahead and, close ranks on this next phase. And China's not going to be part of that, at least in terms of developing it. And remember, we're talking about a period of time that's probably 5 to 10 years in the future. All right. However, it's kind of like, no, we're not planning
Oh,
on, letting this become, an opportunity to either leapfrog or, take advantage of this particular thing, because as you said at the outset, the intellectual property environment in China and the defensibility of it is low relative to rest of world. It's not
yeah.
that it doesn't exist. It's getting better because China is beginning to develop some intellectual property that it would like to defend. All right. So it's the gradient is beginning to move toward, oh, well, maybe we need to play, over in, be a better, global actor in this regard. However, if it's an important thing that the government would like to have access to, then I suspect, with no evidence other than that trigger event, that something like that is behind this move, right? So
Yeah.
I
I mean, when
I
you
just
look at
lay
what,
that out there
uh,
as a speculation.
what was it, 5 years ago, 6 years? No, much sooner than that, right? Where the entire conversation in the core tech world, core, low level, I don't mean low in a pejorative sense, meaning
Mhm,
the metal, the chip,
mhm,
the architectures,
mhm.
quantum computing might be you're right. I mean, you can run your imagination, if you have a little bit of background, can run wild. It's like, holy smokes, have they cracked something in quantum computing that while we've all seen pictures, right, of their quantum computers that look like elaborate chandeliers. It could be something, I don't know that it would hardware. I think it could be something like they figured out how to reduce the power requirements for a data center, or who knows,
Yeah, well, I
right? That
mean,
is all
yeah.
tied to the evolution of AI, because that's what, the right, in the last few years, that's the future. Every country is now wanting to be the leader in AI. And there is probably so much engineering talent they leveraged in China, and as well as their own resources. Yeah, it could, because that, what you describe is like that process of shutting everybody off. Usually, in a few cases I've seen it, it's we've been sold, we've been whatever, we've been purchased,
Mhm.
uh, or we're completely gutting this entire business unit. So shut down everything, not just for leakage, but we just don't want any, not for leakage of IP. There's nobody that's going to talk about it internally except the leadership that's made this move. And so that's why we shut everything down. That, in this day and age, that would have been fine in the 80s or 90s, right? Just cut everybody off Sunday and then announce we've been purchased by X,
Mhm.
right? Or we're exiting this business. Now, part of that, there is no, I don't think, any regulation in China like there are in many parts of the US, right? Where, or I think at federal, right? You're supposed to, if you're a certain company, public, et cetera, you have to disclose ahead of time that you're doing layoffs.
Well, I
You
mean, the
don't have
fact
to give
is
a
that
number, but you have to
those
say,
those laws are probably not operative in China.
no, they're not. Absolutely not. So to me, I think this wasn't about disrupting families and making people upset, IBM employees. I think it's, uh, I too buy into your thesis, right? That scenario, that this is something happened, and boy, this is really good. So get everything off the servers now.
Yeah. The
Uh,
laws in the United States under that trigger that are called Warren laws,
Warren laws, yeah,
WARN, right? And I forgot what the acronym is, but the last word in Warren is notification. Okay.
exactly.
And it's a, um, I think it's worker or something or other notification.
Yes,
And the point is, um, they probably did some, calculus. They checked with their HR people, and said, look, we can do this. Let's go ahead and make that happen. And we'll move on, with, the other. You got to remember that um, in the long span of IBM's history, they have periodically withdrawn from places.
Sure.
So one of the major withdraw moments was in India. We had a typewriter factory, and the government wanted to nationalize the typewriter factory. And he said, "Yeah, well, no, I don't think so." And so we basically, uh, disabled the factory. Right, whatever was left was not, they couldn't do anything with it, and the management team was moved to Singapore, the people that we wanted. And so the core, the nucleus of, what do we know about India? We'll continue to sell some stuff into the market, but we're not going to be there as a manufacturer. Um, they went back, reestablished, and there's a huge presence in India. The chairman of the business, is, you know, not Native American, Indian India, from India, right? From Asia.
South
And
Asia.
yeah, and the point is, that's, this may be another one of those blips where it's kind of like you come out and, at some point, given different circumstances, you'll go back in, right? But this was a cold, there was nothing about, that they were making certain provisions, and that they had already transferred. No, I mean, it was just a cold stop. And you can't do that. I can see how you can do that with R&D. It was very difficult strategically when I was doing strategy to stop a business unit that way. And we would normally
Right.
want to spin it off into somebody else's hands because there was an install base, there were people to be served, and you couldn't get rid of those obligations. So you wanted someone else to take over the custodianship of that particular product line.
Sure.
But in R&D, you can stop cold, right? And so that's what they've
Yeah.
done. We'll have to wait. We may never know, right?
Oh, right. Well, especially if it's some sort of breakthrough in root core technologies, we're not going to know till it's rolled out somehow, right? And it might take a while to even trace back to the origin of that decision to move. But because that, I would imagine, hoisting the flag 6 months from now and say, yeah, we've now, cracked the code on quantum computing or whatever. I don't think that necessarily is something they're going to want to, even admit to down the road. But
it'll be a while.
And it could be mundane, right? It's, as part of that intellectual property thread we kind of tugged on a little earlier, it meant a number of the news reports, right, were, and I think history in the last 20 years, when we talk about IP and China is, that part of that push for China about IP was they wanted to enable their local, right, or domestic tech companies to grow, right, and compete against the global leaders. And I say that could be a driver as well, which is, we're losing out to the competition. But to your point, again, R&D has never been, directly tied and impacting, quarterly or annual returns and revenue.
So here's the other.
On the other hand, why wouldn't you license that to the Chinese? I don't know, but I mean, that's
okay. So here's another lens. All right, when you think about the competitors in India that were outsourcing giants, the Tatas, the Wipros, the Cognizant, and others. They're competing mostly with Kyndryl now, that services spin out. And So you look at that and say, well, who are the competitors, right, that would challenge what IBM is doing if they got a hold of whatever it is? Well, it's probably the closest one that has any visibility is Huawei. Okay.
Hmm.
They won't let the NVIDIA chips in there. There's some, thought that the Huawei version of what NVIDIA makes as a massively parallel processing chip, you know, in some ways can outperform NVIDIA's. But then again, we haven't had our hands on their chip set
Right.
either. So what are you actually benchmarking against? What are the actual tests? There's a little bit of hype, okay, of, whose chip is bigger than my chip, right,
Right.
kind of thing. But there's no emergent IBM-like entity that I can see that is in China. So second speculation, okay, is our market intelligence capability and sensory apparatus is pretty sophisticated. Okay, and the economists and the people who could look at supply chains and look at things, right? The other thing that could have happened is they may have detected that there was an IBM clone entity that was getting ready to emerge in China that was going to get state sponsorship. Okay. I'm not talking about Lenovo, right? Although
Hmm.
you could imagine that, Lenovo could, grow into some of the, spaces, but I've, it hasn't actually become, a clone of what IBM is doing. I see no, that they have any interest in the research topics that were being
Well,
investigated. However, if they the intelligence was coming in that said, oh, guess what, they're about to take the stuff that we're doing and they're going to create their own entity to compete with us, we're not going to help you, thank you very much. Okay. So
right.
that's an alternative theory, okay, that I put out there, a hypothesis that I don't have any data to support either, other than that's the kind of thinking that would trigger an action like this.
Yeah, and it would probably be somewhere in AI and software is what I would be thinking is if they could have that element at a company like Lenovo,
Yeah,
their own operating system, whatever.
yeah. Because if
Um,
you think that Yorktown, Almaden, Zurich, Haifa, all right, these major labs around the world are dependent on the revenue of the country that they exist in, ah,
right.
you're out of your mind. Okay. So that's it has to do with access to that top talent that the company wants. And then it's going to grab the revenue, globally, all right, downstream.
Hmm.
So, all right. Maybe that one other and it's just occurring to me is some of these scientists, depending on what you are, can move from Yorktown to Almaden or Almaden to, and it may be that given the starting to freeze, that it was not a good place for us to send people who weren't Chinese into the Chinese market or to move the Chinese people into other laboratories in other parts of the world, that if we didn't have that flexibility um, to be able to reorganize R&D as we saw, because they're glued in place, they can't leave, right?
Hmm.
Then that also could have been a factor in saying, this is not flexible enough for the way that we need to be adaptive, right? For, what we see as, the opportunities. We can't work with those restrictions.
Right. No, I think that's as likely as any, right? Is again, we might be okay for another year, but 3 years out, especially if some of these scientists and engineers are working on some, set of things that are about to break through. There's the idea of just exiting and pulling all that IP out so we don't have to worry about it. More importantly, the people who've worked on that, if, I would, most countries have some version of an H-1B, right, that we have here in the U.S. Those are probably, like they are in the U.S., harder and harder to get, right? And a, count on is a certain number you will have this year, next year. If you don't have that, because, getting teams into China, and more importantly, Chinese citizens who happen to work with IBM, if, as you say, they're glued in place, what do we know nowadays, right, is you don't have 20 years, on a 20-year window on an R&D, on some breakthrough. It's a lot shorter cycle. And you need, it's not that I'm an engineer and have expert, I've read a lot and studied and been around a lot of people. When something like that hits a certain point, it's hard to keep it quiet, especially if you're going to file patents and things like that. And more importantly, the people who are associated with the development of those technologies, again, if there's any indication that they're going to get stuck because they're glued in place and they're not going to be able to move the last, whatever you want to call it, last mile of that big project, that's something where the risk folks, and the executive staff are just like, we can't afford this. If we can't guarantee that these 5 people or 20 or 100 or whatever are going to be available a year from now or 2 years to work in, name a European country or another Asian country, that's existential.
Yeah.
That's as existential as any kind of geopolitical threat, right? As if we're at that last phase, and it's critical now before we start filing IP, patents, et cetera, that are going to be disclosed publicly. Well, that actually sounds more likely than now that as we talk, hey, wait a minute, we're close on this. We got to get everybody out.
Yeah.
There's not enough clarity and stability in this environment for us to guarantee that we have access to this expertise.
Yeah. One last piece to which is more of the watch this space. And I'll tip my hat to Todd Hoskins, who is one of our Content Evolution members who runs Canopy Gap. His the name of his company is based on when the canopy of the rainforest opens because a large tree falls, that was providing, that was absorbing a lot of light at the top of the canopy, that it gets sick or gets cut down or whatever, and light can drop to the floor of the forest. There's all kinds of opportunistic growth that was inhibited before that now can take place because sunlight is hitting the ground. This clear cut of this team, it's going to be interesting to see, the IBM canopy is gone. Where will these people go? All right. And will they reform their own teams? Will they get sponsorship, right? To create, some kind of a lab by, the government saying, you guys stay together. Okay. Let's, or do they get placed into other tech firms, that Lenovo gets some of them, and Huawei gets some of them. It's just going to be interesting to see what happens downstream from this, because IBM does have a tendency to hire top talent, and so these are probably really smart people, right? And they're going to end up someplace, all right? They're not going to end up sweeping the streets. So it'll be interesting to see where they go and whether that can be in any way understood or tracked.
As long as we're hypothesizing and scenario development, it just occurred to me. We talked about it last year. Xerox PARC. PARC in Palo Alto. That's the new headquarters for those. I'm not saying that's not a fact, people. I'm just saying, hey, there's a facility that's sitting right there for a lot of smart people to go work on stuff. And there's probably, if it's chips or other things, there's probably some demo fabs at Intel they could use or somewhere else. My point is that I'm not joking there. I'm just saying that's the kind of entity, right, that has played such an important pivotal role, right, in the development of technologies that we now use every day. And it's not doing a lot right now, right? That's been kind of in the news locally is Wither Park. And Park's not the only one, right? The kind of a facility like that where you could concentrate, a number of top talent people who are working on perhaps some significant breakthroughs. Now, here again, as you say, we talked about earlier, can I get everybody on this team into the US and working there? I don't know. But it represents not just a physical space, but more importantly, an intellectual space that just happens to be bordered by, the city of Palo Alto, et cetera, et cetera. And there's probably lots of those, not lots, but a few places around the world where they might be looking to locate that team to insulate them from some of these more, disrupted day-to-day kinds of events.
We will see. But that.
But I think my last thought is this is very fast. This happened very quickly and didn't seem to be anything that was foreshadowed whatsoever.
No, I mean,
Microsoft kind of foreshadowed their stuff, their kind of reduction of staff and teams in China a while ago. And, here again, there are some business reasons possibly, but probably something to do with IP. And so I think that it's just the rapidity, the speed with which this was kind of announced and done. Well, I guess it's not done yet. They didn't ferry everybody out yet of the R&D facility, but it seems like it's happened. It happened very quickly with I didn't do an exhaustive search, but there didn't seem to be any indicators of this till that story you sent me on Monday or Tuesday.
No, and I did a little search to see whether there was any, news, coming out of any, outlets from that part of the world. And interestingly enough, it's getting pick up in, U.S. North American press. All right, doesn't seem to be getting any pickup. All right, and so it's like, no, we're not really interested in talking about this. Okay, so I suppose if I were to talk to research people in Japan or in some of the other locations, that they might have an opinion here. But I haven't done that work, and I thought it would be better for me to speculate in the absence of actually gathering facts, because it's I'm not here to actually be an analyst. I'm here to provide a scenario environment, right, that would allow people to look at this and think about it and say, well, are there other companies that might have to take a similar stance or point of view? And
well, there's still a lot of really good reporters, editors out there, right, who are going to be covering this to the extent they can.
To the extent they can.
And it doesn't, other than providing that kind of scenario view and what ifs, that's what, that's where we can be more helpful.
Yeah.
Right. Breaking news is somebody else's, expertise.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're in the art of the long view, right, territory here. Well, thanks for taking a moment on the cusp of Labor Day. I'm planning on getting this and the other episode out the door, all right, that we did yesterday, because there are good companion pieces for the long weekend ahead. And thanks for everything you do.
You bet.
We'll talk again soon. And next time something's breaking, you'll hear from us here on a special episode of Content Evolution.
Well, can I foreshadow one thing?
Sure, go ahead.
There is one thing, because we've talked about it before. Apparently there's news this morning, September 9th. the day I start my vacation. Apple's has sent the smoke up into the air to say there's product announcement on big event on September 9th.
It was white smoke instead of black smoke.
White smoke, yeah,
Chimney.
exactly.
Guys, there you go. That's good. It's good to know that something new is about to arrive, right?
That's what's interesting is how interesting the news cycle is. That popped up on the Journal, and it's popping up on a few other places, but it has not generated the explosion of speculation that used to happen like 5 years ago. Right? It was the smoke's come up. It's September 9th. And people would go nuts. Not so much.
Well, we'll see. We'll see if we can get our friend Tim Beharan, right, to comment, that Thursday on what's up. We'll see. Again, enjoy that vacation that's coming up, and we'll talk to you
Thanks.
soon. Cheers.
See ya.